In the spring of 2011, the United States Department of Agriculture officially shuttered Silas Blackwood's on-farm butcher shop with a single padlock that cost the government $14.75. The lock was a master lock, model 6835, made of hardened boron alloy, designed to resist cutters and saws. It was affixed to a new steel hasp that had been drilled into the 110-year-old cypress door of the butcher house his grandfather had built. By 2018, the small stone building 100 yards away, a spring house nobody had used for 50 years, was generating 3 times the revenue with 1/10 the overhead. This is the story of how. The Blackwood farm was not a large operation. It comprised 284 acres of rolling pasture and hardwood stands in the western part of Greene County, Tennessee. The deed was signed in 1888 by Silas's great-grandfather, a man named Thomas Blackwood, who bought the land for $1,900 in gold coin after 2 years of logging his own timber to raise the sum. He built the main house from that same timber, yellow pine and white oak, and he built a spring house from the fieldstone he and his sons cleared from what would become the north pasture. Let me tell you about that spring house, because it's where the story ends. It was a simple structure, 12 feet by 16 feet, dug 4 feet into a north-facing slope where a steady, reliable spring emerged from the earth. The water, which ran at a constant 52 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, was channeled through a stone trough that bisected the dirt floor. The fixed stone walls, laid without mortar, kept the interior air cool and humid, a perfect natural refrigerator. For 70 years, it was where the Blackwoods kept their milk, their butter, their eggs, and the salted pork that got them through the winters. Then, in 1958, the Rural Electrification Administration ran a line down their gravel road, and Thomas's son, Silas's grandfather, bought a Frigidaire refrigerator for $319.95. The spring house became a place for storing old jars and broken tools. Its purpose had been superseded by technology. Silas Blackwood was 68 years old in 2011. He had worked the farm for 54 of those years since he was old enough to carry a feed bucket without falling over. He was a quiet man, known for a stillness that could be mistaken for slowness, but was in fact a deep and practiced economy of motion. He never hurried. He never wasted a step. His hands were thick and calloused, but they were precise. He could fix a diesel engine with a length of wire and a pair of pliers. He could tell you the moisture content of hay by its scent, and he could butcher a hog with a grace that bordered on reverence. The on-farm butcher shop was his grandfather's creation, built in 1901. It was a small, whitewashed clapboard building with a concrete floor sloped to a central drain. It had a heavy oak cutting block, worn into a gentle saddle shape by a century of use, and a collection of knives that Silas's grandfather had forged himself from old saw blades. Silas still used them. He sharpened them every Sunday evening on a whetstone his father had brought back from a trip to Arkansas, its surface smooth as silk. For 30 years, Silas had processed his own hogs, Berkshires, a heritage breed known for its rich, marbled meat, and those of his neighbors. He charged a fair price, $1.25 a pound hanging weight, and he did good work. People trusted him. His business was not large, but it was steady. It grossed about $40,000 a year, and after expenses, the electricity for the walk-in cooler, the wrapping paper, the insurance, it netted him about $5,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it paid the property taxes and kept a local tradition alive. The trouble started not with a complaint, but with a form. A new federal regulation, part of the Food Safety Modernization Act, required all meat processing facilities, no matter how small, to be federally inspected if they sold meat across county lines, which Silas occasionally did when a friend from a neighboring county brought him a hog. The law had existed before, but enforcement in rural areas had been lax. Now, it was not. The man who brought the trouble was named David Chen. He was 32 years old, had a master's degree in food science from Cornell University, and had worked for the USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service for 4 years. He was not a villain. He was a believer. He believed in systems, in data, in quantifiable metrics for safety. He believed that regulations were the only thing standing between the public and an outbreak of listeria or E. coli. He drove a government-issue Ford Taurus, and he arrived at the Blackwood farm on a Tuesday morning in October of 2010. Silas was in the middle of breaking down a 250-pound hog when Chen arrived, clipboard in hand. Silas's son Jacob was there that day. Jacob was 31, had a business degree from the University of Tennessee, and had come back to the farm 5 years prior with ideas about expansion, about marketing, about scaling up. He saw the future in vacuum sealers and online ordering. He loved his father, but he saw his ways as antiquated, a liability in the modern world. Chen introduced himself politely. He wore disposable blue booties over his polished shoes. He explained he was there for a preliminary facility assessment. For the next 3 hours, he walked through the small building making notes. He measured the lumens of the light fixtures. He took temperature readings of the walk-in cooler. He ran a gloved finger along a crack in the concrete floor. He asked Silas for his HACCP plan. Silas looked at him. My what? Hazard analysis and critical control points, Chen explained. A written plan, identifying every potential point of contamination in the process, from receiving the live animal to the final sale, with documented procedures for mitigating each risk. It needed to be scientifically validated. It needed to be logged daily. Silas gestured to the room. I wash my hands. I wash my tools. I keep the meat cold. My plan is in my head. I've been doing it for 40 years. Never had a problem. Chen made a note on his clipboard. He pointed to the oak cutting block. That's a porous surface. It can't be sanitized. Regulations require non-porous, food-grade polyethylene or stainless steel. That block has been here 110 years, Silas said, his voice even. It's soaked so deep with salt, it's preserved itself. Chen made another note. He pointed to the wooden handles on Silas's grandfather's knives. Porous surface. He pointed to the painted clapboard walls. Not a smooth, easily cleanable surface. He noted the floor drain wasn't up to code, and the junction between the floor and the wall wasn't coved for proper cleaning. The list went on. By the end of the inspection, Chen had identified 27 distinct violations of the federal code. He was not unkind about it. He laid out the path to compliance. Silas would need to replace the cutting block, the knives, the lighting. He would need to resurface the walls with epoxy-coated panels, pour a new coved floor, and install a new drainage system. He would need to hire a consultant to draft an 87-page HACCP plan. And he would need to keep meticulous daily records of temperatures, cleaning procedures, and supplier information. The estimated cost for the upgrades, Chen said, pulling a brochure from his briefcase for a company that specialized in small plant construction, would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000. Jacob saw an opportunity. He saw a loan, a new facility, a chance to modernize and expand. He saw a brand, Blackwood Heritage Meats. He spent weeks putting together a business plan, getting quotes, talking to a loan officer at the bank in town. We can do this, Dad, he'd said, spreading spreadsheets across the kitchen table. We can increase our volume by 500%. We can get into restaurants in Knoxville, in Nashville. This isn't a problem. It's a catalyst. Silas looked at the numbers. He looked at the debt figure, $250,000 at 6.8% interest, a monthly payment of $2,872 for 10 years. That was more than the butcher shop had ever netted in a year. He looked at the projected revenue, the numbers Jacob had pulled from industry reports. They were optimistic. They assumed a market that didn't exist yet. They assumed he could process 5 times the animals without losing the quality, the touch that was the only reason people came to him in the first place.
He looked at his son, his face full of excitement and belief in a future made of stainless steel and government approvals. Then he looked out the window at the old butcher house. "The debt is the trap," he said quietly. "We take their money, we have to play by their rules. All of them. We become a small version of the big guys, and we'll get crushed. But we don't have a choice." Jacob's voice was tight with frustration. "It's this, or it's nothing. Chen is coming back in 6 months. We have to show progress." Silas was silent for a long time. He picked up one of the spreadsheets. "This paper says we'll make more money, but it doesn't say what it will cost. Not the dollars, the other things." For the next 6 months, the argument simmered. Jacob pushed, Silas resisted. Jacob saw his father as stubborn, afraid of change. Silas saw his son as naive, seduced by a logic that had put thousands of small farmers like them out of business. The bank provisionally approved the loan, contingent on the USDA's approval of the building plans. Jacob hired an architect to draw them up.
The plan showed a new metal building, a perfect, sterile box that would sit where the old vegetable garden used to be. The old butcher house would be torn down. David Chen returned in April of 2011. He was again polite. He asked to see the progress. Jacob proudly unrolled the architectural drawings on the hood of his truck. Chen looked them over. He nodded. "This is a good start," he said. "A very good start." He turned to Silas. "So, what have you done in the existing facility to move toward temporary compliance?" "Nothing," Silas said. Chen's face hardened slightly. "Mr. Blackwood, I gave you a list of 27 violations. You've addressed none of them. The wooden cutting block is still there. The knives, the floor, it's the same way my grandfather did it, and his father." Chen's professionalism finally cracked, just a little. His voice was firm. "Sir, your grandfather didn't have to worry about multi-state outbreaks of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. We have systems now to prevent that." "The law isn't optional. The law doesn't know the difference between this place and the 10,000 hog a day factory in Iowa." "That's the point," Chen said. "The law doesn't have to. The pathogens are the same. The rules are the same. It's the only way to guarantee safety." Silas looked at the young man. He saw the certainty in his eyes, the absolute faith in the book he carried. He didn't see malice. He saw a different kind of knowledge, one learned in a classroom, not in a barn. A knowledge of abstracts, of systems, of probabilities. He knew he could not explain his own knowledge, the feel of the meat, the smell of the air, the deep cellular understanding of a process he had inhabited his entire life. It was a language Chen did not speak. "I can't do what you're asking," Silas said. Jacob jumped in. We will. The new facility, it's all planned. We just need a provisional license to operate here while it's being built. 6 months, maybe 8. Chen shook his head. "I can't do that. This facility is grossly out of compliance. I have no choice." He walked to the cypress door of the butcher house. He took out the drill, the hasp, and the $14.75 padlock. The drill whined as it bit into the old wood. Jacob pleaded. Silas stood by the fence, his arms crossed, watching. He did not say a word. The community witnesses in this case were the dozen or so Berkshire hogs in the nearby pen, who watched the proceedings with mild curiosity. When the lock clicked shut, the sound was small, but absolute. The business that had paid the taxes on this farm for 3 generations was over. The silence that followed was heavy. Jacob was furious. He yelled at his father, his words echoing across the pasture. "You threw it all away! For what? For a piece of wood? For some old knives? You're stuck in the past and you just dragged us all down with you!" He got in his truck, spun his tires in the gravel, and sped off down the drive. Silas stood there for an hour, looking at the lock. He felt the weight of the failure. He had let his grandfather down. He had alienated his son. The government, with its good intentions and its clipboards, had come to his home and declared his life's work unsafe, unclean, unlawful. He walked back to the house.
He sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Jacob had spread his spreadsheets, and he felt the full, crushing weight of 68 years. He felt old. He felt beaten. That evening, Jacob didn't come back for dinner. Silas ate alone. He went to bed early, but he couldn't sleep. Around midnight, he got up, put on his boots, and walked out into the cool spring night. He didn't go to the shuttered butcher house. He found himself walking up the slope toward the old spring house. He hadn't been inside it in years. The door, made of heavy oak, was swollen and stuck fast. He had to put his shoulder into it. It gave way with a groan of damp wood against stone. The air that hit him was cool, earthy, alive. It smelled of wet stone, of deep earth, of clean water. He stepped inside, his eyes adjusted to the dark. He could hear the gentle, constant gurgle of the spring as it flowed through the stone channel his great-grandfather had carved. He put his hand into the water. It was shockingly, beautifully cold, 52 degrees. He could feel the consistency of it, the unwavering temperature that came from deep within the hill. The air inside the stone walls was still and heavy with moisture. He stood there for a long time, just breathing. He wasn't thinking about the USDA or the lock or his son. He was just feeling the place. And then a memory surfaced. His grandfather standing in this very spot a long time ago. He was a small boy, maybe 6 or 7. His grandfather was holding a ham, a big country ham, caked in salt and black pepper. He was hanging it from an iron hook set into one of the overhead oak beams. "This is the secret, boy," his grandfather had said, his voice a low rumble. "Not the salt, not the smoke. It's the time and the cold, the slow, steady cold. It lets the salt do its work without the meat going bad. It's a race. The salt has to win. Here, the salt always wins." Silas looked up. The iron hooks were still there, dark with rust. There were a dozen of them, hammered into the beams a century ago. He had forgotten all about them. He had forgotten that long before the butcher shop was a business that sold fresh cuts of pork, the Blackwood family were known for one thing above all else: their salt-cured country hams. It was a slower process, a more patient art. It required no electricity. It required no stainless steel. It required no daily logs. It required only 3 things: good pork, good salt, and a place like this. A place with a constant, deep, natural cold. He stood in the dark, the cool air on his face, and for the first time since David Chen had arrived, he felt a flicker of something that was not despair. It was the germ of an idea, a quiet, stubborn, deeply rooted idea. The next morning, he did not try to call his son. He did not look at the padlocked butcher house. He took a wheelbarrow, a shovel, and a stiff brush, and he went back to the spring house. He spent the entire day cleaning it out. He shoveled out 50 years of accumulated dirt, leaves, and forgotten junk. He found old mason jars, a broken axle from a Model T, a rusted crosscut saw. He scrubbed the stone walls and the water channel until they were clean. The work was hard, his back ached, but it felt good. It was purposeful work. Jacob came home that evening, sullen and quiet. He saw the pile of refuse outside the spring house. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice flat. Silas didn't stop his work. "Cleaning." Jacob scoffed. "What for? Going to store more junk in it?" Silas finally straightened up and looked at his son. "I'm going into the ham business." Jacob stared at him, incredulous. "The ham business? Dad, nobody wants those salt bombs anymore."
People want lean pork chops. They want tenderloin. They read blogs about healthy eating. Silas picked up a shovel. Some people still know what good food tastes like. It's a dead business, Dad. It's even more of a relic than the butcher shop was. Maybe, Silas said, but it's a business the USDA doesn't care about. And this was the key. This was the piece of knowledge Silas had that David Chen, with his master's degree, did not. Let me explain it to you. The USDA's jurisdiction, the thing they could regulate and shut down, was the commercial slaughter and processing of fresh meat for sale. But the ancient art of salt curing fell into a different category. As long as you weren't slaughtering the animals yourself for commercial sale, and as long as the curing process followed certain long-established guidelines, it was considered a form of preservation, like canning vegetables from your garden. You could sell the resulting product directly to consumers from your farm, without needing a federally inspected facility. It was a loophole, but it wasn't a loophole. It was a grandfather clause, a nod to a tradition so old it predated the entire regulatory state. The system had a blind spot, and the blind spot was shaped exactly like a country ham. Silas couldn't slaughter his neighbor's hogs anymore, but he could still raise his own. He could take them to a small, state-inspected facility 30 miles away for the slaughter, a service that cost him $75 per animal, and bring the fresh hams, the raw material, back to his own farm. What he did with them there, in the cool, dark spring house, was his own business. Jacob thought he was crazy. He saw it as a retreat, a pathetic, small-time hobby. He refused to have anything to do with it. He got a job in town, working for a logistics company, tracking shipments on a computer screen. He and Silas lived in the same house, but barely spoke. The silence was a constant low-grade hum of disapproval. Silas was undeterred. In the fall of 2011, he raised 20 Berkshire hogs. He took them for slaughter and brought back 40 fresh hams, each weighing about 22 pounds. He bought 800 pounds of Morton's salt, 50 pounds of black pepper, and 20 pounds of red pepper flakes. He dredged the hams in the salt mixture, packing it into every crevice, rubbing it deep into the meat. It was his grandfather's recipe, his grandfather's method. He laid them on wooden shelves he'd built inside the spring house. For 6 weeks he let them cure, turning them every few days. Then he washed them, coated them in black pepper to keep the pests away, put each one in a cloth sack his wife had sewn for him years ago, and hung them from the old iron hooks. And then he waited. The art of a country ham is the art of patience. It's a controlled decomposition. The salt draws out the water, making the meat inhospitable to bacteria. The enzymes within the meat begin to break down the proteins into amino acids, creating complex flavors, savory, nutty, sweet. This process, this alchemy, takes time. It takes at least a year. The best hams, his grandfather always said, take 2. Silas decided he would wait 18 months. Through the winter of 2011, through the entire year of 2012, and into the spring of 2013, the hams hung in the cool, damp dark of the spring house. Silas would go in and check on them, tapping them, smelling them. The scent of the room changed slowly, from the sharp smell of salt to a deep, funky, nutty aroma that was indescribably rich. During that time, the farm bled money. Without the butcher shop income, Silas was living off savings. He sold some timber to get through the first winter. Jacob watched, his anger slowly turning to a kind of pity for the old man and his strange, silent project. He offered to help his father find a buyer for the farm. A developer was building a subdivision a few miles away. "You could get a good price, Dad. You could retire, live comfortably." Silas just shook his head. "You don't sell your bones." In May of 2013, 18 months after he had hung the first batch, Silas decided it was time. He took down one of the hams. It was hard and flat, much smaller than when he'd hung it, having lost nearly 40% of its weight in water. It was covered in a harmless, powdery blue-green mold, a sign of a good, slow aging process. He scrubbed it clean, and with a sense of ceremony, he carried it to the kitchen.
Jacob was there, getting ready for work. He watched with a skeptical eye as Silas put the ham on the old oak block, the very one that had been declared a hazard, which Silas had moved to the house, and sliced off a piece. The meat inside was a deep, translucent ruby red, streaked with creamy white fat. The aroma filled the kitchen. Silas shaved a few paper-thin slices and dropped them into a hot cast-iron skillet. They sizzled and crisped in seconds. He didn't say a word.
He just nudged the plate toward his son.
Jacob hesitated. Then he picked up a piece of the crisp, salty meat and put it in his mouth. His expression changed. The skepticism melted away. The taste was a revelation. It was intensely savory, but also sweet, nutty, with a complexity he had never experienced. It was nothing like the bland, water-injected pork chops from the supermarket. It was nothing like the overly salty country ham he remembered from childhood. This was different. This was something profound. It was the taste of the place, of the pasture, of the cool, dark earth of the spring house. It was the taste of time. He looked at his father, and for the first time in 2 years, he smiled. That's really good, Dad." Silas nodded. "I know." That first year, Silas didn't have a marketing plan. He didn't have a website. He had a folding table. He took the table and one of the hams, sliced thin, to the farmer's market in town.
He set up a sign, hand-painted on a piece of plywood. Blackwood hams, aged 18 months. He sold slices for $1 apiece. At first, people were hesitant, but the smell of the ham frying in his skillet drew them in, and the taste convinced them. By the end of the day, he had sold out of the sample slices and had taken orders for 10 whole hams. He charged $12 a pound. A 14-pound aged ham sold for $168. That first day, he cleared over $1,700. Word of mouth is a slow and powerful force. It moves at the speed of trust. The people who bought those first hams told their friends. A chef from a farm-to-table restaurant in Knoxville was visiting family in the area and tried a slice. He bought 2 hams on the spot. A week later, he called and ordered 10 more. He put it on his menu. Silas Blackwood's 18-month Berkshire country ham. He charged $18 for an appetizer plate with 3 paper-thin slices. It became the most talked-about dish in the city. Let's look at the numbers, because the numbers tell the story. In 2013, from that first batch of 40 hams, Silas grossed $26,880. His costs were minimal. The slaughter fee, $1,500, the salt, $400, and his own labour. His net profit was over $24,000. That was nearly 5 times what the high-overhead, high-labour butcher shop had ever cleared in a year. Jacob watched all of this. He saw the numbers. He saw the respect in the eyes of the people who bought the hams. He saw his father, not as a stubborn old man stuck in the past, but as a quiet expert who had found a way to turn the system's own logic against it. He had taken their regulations, their constraints, their padlock, and he had sidestepped them completely. He hadn't fought the system. He had rendered it irrelevant. He had found a business that didn't need a loan, didn't need a sterile box, didn't need a HACCP plan. It needed only what the farm already had in abundance: heritage pigs, a family recipe, and a 100-year-old spring house. In the winter of 2013, Jacob quit his job at the logistics company. He came home. He walked out to the spring house where Silas was preparing to hang the next batch of hams, this time 80 of them. "I want to learn," he said. Silas didn't say anything. He just handed his son a ham and a bucket of salt. Over the next 5 years, the business grew slowly, organically. They never took out a loan. They never advertised. They raised their prices as demand grew,
first to $15 a pound, then to $20. They started aging some hams for 2 years, and those sold to high-end restaurants for $30 a pound. Jacob built a simple website and started shipping hams across the country. They sold out every year. By 2018, they were processing 200 hogs a year, selling 400 hams. Their gross revenue was just over $120,000. Their overhead was less than $10,000 a year.
The net profit was more than Silas had made in the previous 20 years combined.
The padlocked butcher shop stood empty, a silent monument to a battle that had been lost in order to win a war. One afternoon in the fall of 2018, a Ford sedan pulled into the gravel drive. A man in a government polo shirt got out. It was David Chen. He looked older. He had a few grey hairs at his temples. He was a regional supervisor now. He said he was in the area for another inspection and saw the farm and thought he'd stop by. He didn't mention the padlock. He asked Silas how he'd been. "Fine," Silas said. Jacob came out of the house. He recognized Chen immediately. He stood next to his father. There was no animosity in his posture, just a calm confidence. Chen looked around. He saw the healthy-looking Berkshires in the pasture. He saw the obvious signs of a prosperous, well-run farm. He seemed genuinely curious. "So what are you doing now?" he asked. "I see the butcher shop is still closed."
"We're in the ham business," Jacob said. Chen looked puzzled. "Country hams? I thought that market was dead." "It's a small market," Jacob said, "but it's a good one." Chen nodded, a flicker of his old professional self returning. "You're selling them? You have a processing facility? I'd need to see your paperwork, your HACCP plan." "We don't have one," Silas said quietly. "What do you mean you don't have one? How can you operate without—" "We don't need one," Jacob interrupted, his voice calm and steady. "We use a state-inspected abattoir for slaughter. The curing is done on farm, direct to consumer. It's an exempt process under USDA Regulation 9 CFR 300-3.1. You should know it. It's in your book." Chen was silent. He knew the regulation. It was an obscure one, a relic from another era, one that inspectors rarely, if ever, had to deal with. He was a man who lived by the book, and he had just been beaten by a footnote he'd never paid attention to. He looked from Silas to Jacob. He looked at the old stone spring house, a building that would fail every single one of his metrics for modern food safety, and yet was producing one of the most sought-after food products in the state. He saw no porous surfaces to cite, no temperature logs to demand, no procedural violations to write up. He saw a system that his system could not touch. There was nothing for him to do here. There was no box to check, no form to fill out. He finally just nodded. "Well, good for you." He got back in his car and drove away. After he was gone, Silas and Jacob stood there for a moment. Jacob looked at his father. "He told me I was stuck in the past," he said. "He was right, I am. Everything I need is back there." The lesson was not that the old ways are always better. The lesson was that the right way is the one that fits the place it's in. The USDA system was designed for a world of industrial scale, of placeless commodities, of interchangeable parts. It was a good system for that world. But it was the wrong system for a 284-acre farm in Greene County, Tennessee. Silas Blackwood's victory was not in proving the government wrong. It was in proving that another way was possible. He didn't build a smaller version of their system. He remembered a much older one, a system based not on regulations and electricity, but on salt and patience. A system based not on debt, but on inheritance. What survives is not always what is biggest, or newest, or most compliant. What survives is what knows its own ground. The rigid, sterile, expensive box that the regulations demanded would have been a monument to debt, a fragile enterprise dependent on market projections and interest rates. The old spring house, dug into the earth, was a monument to resilience. What is rigid breaks. What is rooted adapts, and in adapting endures. The $14.75 padlock still hangs on the door of the old butcher shop, rusted now by 7 years of rain. Silas never took it off. He says it's a reminder of the day the government came and tried to save him from himself, and in doing so, showed him the path to a prosperity he had never imagined.